Okay, so starting with Jeff, the sitting counterman, if you'd like to introduce yourself, then we'll go on and then you can say your speech after.
So we're going to do intros first and then we'll go back?
Yes.
Okay, I'm Jeff Lee. Sorry? Are we ready, Phil?
Yep.
Excellent.
Got what's the height of these seats? So I can ensure it.
I'm Jeff Lee, MP for Parramatta.
I'm Phil Bradley. I'm the Greens candidate for Parramatta.
I'm James Shaw, Parramatta City Councillor and Labor candidate for Parramatta.
Okay, so starting with Jeff as the sitting MP, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Ron. Thank you for the opportunity to say a few words in terms of workers' compensation. And let me start off by my background in small business has given me a little bit of an understanding about what workers' compensation is about and some of the difficulties that we've experienced in workers' compensation over the time. And I think if you look back at the history of workers' compensation, both the employers, the government, it's been a basket case for many years, and it's very complicated, very convoluted, very costly exercise, where I think in fact the results have been that the competitive style of and the legislation, the red tape and things have meant that workers have actually missed out in the past, and there's been a lot of legal fees and things that have chewed up compensation payouts. And I think it's something like 50% of payouts are actually chewed up in those legal fees. So I guess our government came in 2011 and recognised that there was an issue with workers' compensation, and what can we actually do to improve that whole framework, to base it around 3 or 4 different principles. And I guess the first principles that we want to get injured workers rehabilitated and back to work as soon as we can. So the principle is that we don't want people to stay home for the rest of their lives. In fact, we want to provide everything that's necessary to give them incentives to return to the workforce and become productive members of the workforce. And I think that's really important to the individual, for their self-worth, for their self-value, for their emotional well-being, and for their whole family's well-being. I think the second principle really needs to look at that, and I think the unions and the government agree, that any workers' compensation system is actually self-sustaining, so that the premiums paid in maintain that whole system and that it doesn't go into deficit. So it needs to be a self-sustaining system that actually reaches the end goals and the principles of that system. In other words, rehabilitation for the injured worker, getting them back into the workforce, and if there's a serious injury, people who are seriously injured, a fair and just payout for those people so that they can try and get their lives back into their own lifestyle that hopefully is close as before they were injured. And probably the final one is we need a system that's really balanced between injured workers, payouts for those, getting people rehabilitated, and then the costs of workers' compensation. Now that's important too, the cost of workers' compensation, because not just in terms of sustainability, but in terms of encouraging jobs growth. So in 2000, I'll just give you a quick example, in 2011 when we came into government, PricewaterhouseCoopers did the study. They said if we don't do anything to the system as it stands now, and in fact what will happen, there will lead to a 28% increase in premiums. And already premiums in New South Wales were something like 28%. Already premiums in New South Wales were 20 to 60% higher than our counterparts in Victoria and Queensland. So there's a financial imperative to actually be cost competitive with the other states, otherwise we have less jobs. And the PricewaterhouseCoopers said that if we had a 28% increase in workers' comp premiums, which were one of the highest amongst all the states, in fact we'd lose another 12,000 odd jobs. So it's really important that we have a balanced system between rehabilitation, payments for injured workers, long-term payments for those that won't return or seriously injured, and also a sustainable system so that we can actually use that money to its best effect. I think if you look at the overall system, there's been every year $2.6 billion odd paid out in premiums. There's something like 80,000 claims, which is a significant number of claims, and there's about 3 million workers it covers. I'll just finish. I see that I've got to wind up the 4 minutes, but I think if we look at some of the results of the reforms that we introduced in 2012, we've had reduction in premiums, which is encouraging jobs growth. We've had a greater number of people returning to work, something like 70% of people actually returning to work in a shorter time. and we've seen greater payouts for those seriously injured, and I think that's especially important. If there is a serious long-term injury, we give those people more. We're reducing the red tape, we're reducing those labour costs to make sure that the people who deserve money actually get that money so that they continue their lifestyle and their family life.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jeff. Okay.
Can we ask you questions
Not yet.
before you move on?
No. Save your questions, write them down.
Okay.
We'll go to Phil. Phil, 5 minutes.
Right, I'm Phil Bradley. I'm the Greens candidate for Parramatta, and I'd like to thank the Injured Workers Support Network for inviting me here today. The issue of workers' compensation has been close to my heart throughout my life experiences, and as an active unionist going back to 1972. I think it's really important that when people are thinking about who they vote for, they look at the actual demonstrated history and the record of action of the individuals, and whether in respect to their true commitment to addressing the inequities in the system in regards to workers' compensation. And I think it should be fairly clear that I've demonstrated that as an active unionist all my lifetime, effectively. I've been an attendee to Unions New South Wales and Labour Council meetings for some 23 years. So I've heard some of the appalling cases of injured workers being unfairly treated, and I believe the system is not just as it should be. There should be proper compensation where employers do not treat their workers fairly in terms of having proper safety provisions to ensure that injury does not occur, or is at least the prospect of injury is minimised and the extent of injuries are absolutely minimised. That is a really important right for workers to expect a safe workplace, and in the event that they are injured, that they get properly compensated and have no loss of salary if they are injured due to no fault of their own. So the Greens have strongly supported the Unions New South Wales 12-point plan for a fairer workers' compensation system, and we strongly have a track record again of strongly opposing cuts such going back to the Your Rights at Work campaign and the Carr government's occupational health and safety cuts, where there was a picket around the state parliament. I was actively engaged in that parliament picket, and I think that showed enormous strength of the union movement to fight for what is right and just for them, and they've continued that fight on a whole range of instances. For example, when the O'Farrell government cut workers' compensation entitlements in 2012, I was there at the rally in Macquarie Street, Sydney, in support of workers' rights and entitlements. The Greens fought that legislation in the Parliament and managed to get a last-minute amendment to protect the rights and benefits for emergency services workers. We believe that we should continue that fight, not only for emergency workers, but for all workers. They should be entitled to the same sorts of benefits and in a just system. So the Greens have a well-documented policy which is freely available on the public part of the Greens website in this area. So that demonstrated commitment is there through our industrial relations spokesperson, David Shoebridge, has been a fearless fighter for rights of workers in the state parliament, and we will continue that work to ensure a fairer system, including the right of workers to access their own doctors rather than a scheme of so-called independent medical experts who are beholden to the insurance companies, for example, in many cases. The scheme wasn't originally in chronic deficit and was working towards a situation where the premiums would be able to pay for the benefits for workers, and that is a system that should occur where the employers do contribute to the costs of injuries in the workplace, because that ensures that they take proper procedures and measures to minimise injuries in the workplace. So I'm quite proud as the Greens candidate for Parramatta to continue fighting for workers' rights, and in particular fairness for workers and a safe workplace and the full and proper compensation they deserve in the event that they are injured due to no fault of their own.
Okay. Thank you, Phil. James.
Thanks very much, Rowan. And I just want to thank everyone for being here and the Injured Workers Support Network for all the great work that they do. I was at your dinner last year and it's a fantastic effort that you all make to support injured workers. I'd like to say also, like Phil, I've been involved in workers' compensation for a long time, going back to my early 20s when I was a law clerk at Turner Freeman Solicitors. And I was involved then working on workers' compensation matters. I'd talk to people, I'd hear their stories about their injuries at work and their need for compensation, their need for assistance. And that has strengthened my view that it is absolutely the government's role to support people who are injured at work. If you're injured at work, we should look after you. And that's something that's very important to me. It's something that I'm very proud of, that going back was Jack Lang's Labor government that introduced workers' compensation to support workers who are injured at work. Not because they didn't want to work, because generally speaking, workers want to go back to work. They're frustrated that they've been injured and that they can't. But the importance of looking after people. And yes, rehabilitation is something that's important, and I'll talk about that a bit more, and getting people back. But that does not mean that we should be reducing the support that we are giving to injured workers. And that is what happened in 2012 when the New South Wales government changed the legislation. We had a situation where people for at least 26 weeks would be getting their full financial payments. They'd be getting pre-injury income. Now it's 95% for 13 weeks and 80% after that. Then we have work capacity tests, and that tests your ability to obtain other work. Now that's okay in and of itself, but the problem is your payments are cut off if it's determined that you could work either for your current employer or another employer in a different job. The problem being is that no job may be available. So you're in a situation where you've undertaken a capacity test, you may be able to undertake certain work according to the medical procedures, but if that work is not available, if you aren't able to find it straight away, then you're without support from our workers' compensation system. It's true that there are, for people who have what's called a total incapacity, that they are able to be given payments beyond the 13-week period, but that involves, as I understand, a 20% whole of body injury. You're virtually a quadriplegic if you're in that situation. Medical expenses have been reduced, and you're only covered for 12 months after your payments have run out, and that means that if you're trying to recover, you're trying to get better, you often don't have the support to do so. On top of that, of course, we have the Abbott government's GP tax. So medical expenses have increased for people, and that is another burden on injured workers. Journey claims have been abolished. You're going to work, you're going from work. That is not considered to be a compensable injury. In my view, going to work and coming home, that's part of your working day. And there's no longer any compensation for pain and suffering or for nervous shock for partners. What's important to understand is that the workers' compensation, the work cover scheme, yes, does need to pay for itself. But the assumption was based, the deficit that was being talked about was based on unfunded liabilities. It was assuming that workers would be on compensation until they retire, and that is simply not the reality. Furthermore, investment was historically low because we'd had a global financial crisis. Clearly, that is not meeting reality. It's important to me to fight for injured workers and to stand up for their rights. New South Wales Labor has a 12-point plan to do just that, involving unions, workers, and employers, and that's something that I want to fight for. People in Parramatta, if I'm elected as member for Parramatta in March. Thank you.
Thank you very much to all three candidates. I'll now open up for questions. Reminder of 2 minutes per question at the most.
Cool, I've got lots.
Okay. 2 minutes per question.
I'm a typical example of all the stuff that you spoke about. And it's crap, let me tell you. It's rubbish. The new laws, since Barry O'Farrell brought them out, is terrible. I'm suffering those now. And there's nobody out there to help me. I fight every day. See this yellow letter, yes, letters that I have union support to fight the solicitors. At the moment, I got hurt in 2008. In 2000, a journey claim, I was right on the road to go to work. It was storming. I got out to clean my windows, 2008. 2009, I saved a patient from dying, and I got injured that way. 2 injuries. I get paid for the 2008 injury. In 2012, they put me into the new system. Right? I went into the new laws that Barry O'Farrell brought out.
One more minute.
One more minute. The legal fees, you see this paperwork here? This paperwork is from the solicitor. This is worth 52,000, and that paperwork there is my paperwork that I wrote to the solicitors. 52,000. The solicitors are taking for that paperwork. I don't get paid for the 2009 injuries. I can't walk. My back is finished. And there's no one out there to help me. I've got to go and complain to the Law Society for my injuries. So all this that you said is crap. Absolutely bull.
Do you have a
It
question?
don't work.
Do you have a question in the last 20 seconds?
Okay. Oh God, like I said, I had to come to this meeting today. The premiums have increased. And you say that the premiums not increased. The premiums for workers' compensation have increased. Just like the car, just like the thing. Like you came here today,
Sorry.
but you don't know your facts.
Sorry, we'll have to leave it there.
That's all I have to say.
We'll start off
I'll
with...
talk to you after, when I don't have 2 minutes.
We'll start off with Phil to answer that. I know the question was directed to you, but we'll just turn it around. So Phil, 2 minutes.
There's a big problem, obviously, with the legislation, and the Greens strongly oppose that legislation, as did the union movement as a whole. The Greens, and personally, I very strongly support the Unions New South Wales 12-point plan, which would rectify some of the problems you're referring to. It's simply not fair to the current system of a whole person impairment judgment, and the process which puts it into the hands of medical experts, so-called experts, and doctors who are actually have a relationship with the insurance companies. And that is a really big problem if that is to continue. So that should be rectified, I agree wholeheartedly, and we should have proper assessment of injuries that enable the person to be properly compensated in terms of what they would have earned in their workplace if they hadn't been injured.
Okay. James?
Well, look, I think you raised very good points about people in a situation like yourself. It sounds like you're a health worker or a nurse, I'm not sure. But, you know, doing their work, trying to help people, and, you know, their back goes. That's how they earn their money. Without the ability to earn money, and that's why the workers' compensation system needs to support workers who are injured at work, and that's absolutely why these changes have left a whole lot of people like yourself in a really bad situation through no fault of their own. They're going to work, they're working hard, they're trying to do their job, and they're left out in the cold, and that's something that I want to change.
Can I just say something? You know,
Hold
when
on,
you say we're
hold
not
on.
a drain on the government,
Let Jeff
we
say.
are.
Let Jeff
Because my
say.
injury
Let
is
Jeff
all
say
a
his
drain on the
piece.
government.
We're going to run this straight. Let Jeff say his piece, and then if you've got another question, I'll ask somebody else first. But Jeff.
Can I just ask your name? Sorry, I didn't get you.
My name is Cheryl King.
Cheryl. Now,
Cheryl and King.
I'm sorry to hear about that, the terrible
And I
situation
am
you're
a
in,
drain on the
Cheryl.
government, like you said,
Okay,
we're not a
again-
drain on the government.
Again, Jeff say his
And thank you for sharing your story, Cheryl. And it sounds like, in 2008 you had your injury, then you were paid out. 2009.
No,
2009.
no,
Okay, so none of those have been resolved.
no.
Okay, so I guess this is indicative of what the system. We brought our new legislation in 2012, and it sounds like this is indicative of a workers' comp system before we came to government that was full of red tape and didn't actually work for people like yourself. Like, it doesn't work. 3 years later, your claims have not been resolved, and that's the difficulty. It's estimated that 50% of people's payouts actually go in legal fees, and I tell you, premiums should not go into legal fees. They should actually go to the injured workers for their rehabilitation and process back to work or seriously injured. Can I say that, Phil, you brought up the one about the doctors, they're in the pockets, but they're an independent, they're not in the doctors, in the insurance industry pocket. We want independent assessors to see what's fair and just. And I'll say, but Cheryl, I'm not sure where you're from, but I'm more than happy for Kate to chat to you after about that, because it sounds like a little bit of a complicated case. I don't have any answers. I couldn't advise you. I'm not an expert in terms of your case, so I'm more than happy to chat with you. But it just goes to show that the workers' comp system doesn't work and didn't work before then. So that's why we brought these changes, to reduce the red tape, to give more money, and I think it's better. And the experience, the short-term experience before the initial experiences say that people who have had serious injury are getting higher payouts, and that's what's important, to give money. And you may laugh, Phil, but that's absolutely true, and that's not, that's not me saying that. It's the reports on the system.
Please wrap that up now.
Go.
Okay.
Finished.
Yep, thank you. Any other questions?
Yeah, I'll speak quickly. My background, Gay Cameron, I've been 25 years as a risk and workers' compensation safety professional. I've been consulting for corporate Tier 1 companies. I'm also a wife of a firefighter of 25 years in the service. I had to fight with him 6.5 years to get his medical dispensation to be medically retired from the fire brigades from post-traumatic stress and a crushed vertebrae. Case was denied, but we had to fight tooth and nail. We were financially secured to fight that on our own, as well as the compensation system. Date of injury for him was 2006, and we finally got paid out around 2011. So it was a pretty long battle. For him, he's now self-employed in his own business, and that was only from the wife's perspective, kicking him in the shins and saying, otherwise you're out in the street. I've got a few questions for you. You talked about how you've made some savings for the compensation premiums for businesses now. That's good, but it is not a fair, just system where businesses are not penalised for failing their preventative systems. Safety systems are there to prevent persons from being injured, and all responsibilities lies on business. WorkCover New South Wales in the last 9 years, their rate of prosecutions has failed dismally. There is no faith in the WorkCover New South Wales system anymore from a practitioner's point of view. There's no inspectors going out there prosecuting companies, including government departments. Yes, it could be a minister fighting another minister's portfolio, but the preventative cost is far less than the outgoing cost. So I think government, I'd like to hear from you guys how you're going to make sure WorkCover New South Wales does what they're supposed to be doing preventative management.
Thank you. Starting with James now.
I think that's an excellent point about prevention, and I kind of stuck in my speech to workers' compensation and the Workers' Compensation Act itself. But of course the Work Health and Safety Act, I think, is a big element of that, and the need for work cover, as you say, to prosecute. I mean, by all means, yes, have an educative role, yes, educate employers and employees about safety at work, but they have to have a function where when employers are not abiding by the rules and consistently doing so, or putting people at serious risk, that they are prosecuted. And by the way, for good employers, for those who do the right thing, they're paying the price for the bad employers. I mean, we're talking about premiums. We can reduce premiums by preventing these injuries happening in the first place. That's my view. So Absolutely, I think there needs to be more teeth to work cover. Labor opposed
1 minute.
the Work Health and Safety Act because it did make it more difficult to prosecute employers. It may have had some bipartisan support in Canberra, but in New South Wales Labor opposed that legislation. And also, of course, in my view, it should be the Industrial Relations Commission which undertakes those prosecution functions. So having a strong education role, yes, very important to prevent, but also there needs to be enforcement.
Okay. Jeff.
Thank you, Gay. 6.5 years is a long time, and that sounds like a long time to fight for what's fair and just. Can I say to you that my understanding is based upon being as part of the landscape industry, construction industry, and I would suggest to you that most employers, anyway, in that industry, actually want to do the right thing. Now, because as an employer, I remember it's not only are most of your friends, most of your employees your friends and you don't want to see them employed, but in actual fact you have a duty of care to make a workplace safe as far as practicable. And most employers, and yes, Gay, we do have the occasion that people slip through the thing and do naughty things, absolutely, and they should be prosecuted, absolutely. So work cover does have that ability to go and prosecute people. I think that's particularly important, and that for those who do have claims against them, there is actually incentives for you to do the right thing and have a safe workplace.
1 minute.
Because you actually have an experience factor on your workers' compensation premiums as an employer. So if my premiums, for instance, my business, I spend $1 million, for instance, and then if I had $1 million claim, they assess that as $1 million claim, my workers' comp premium would go up 30% for the next 3 years to cover that whole liability. So I used to try and explain it by, it was a delayed payment scheme by the employer. And of course, that provides incentives to provide that workplace safety. But you're absolutely right in terms of prevention is better than anything. There are disincentives there are penalties if you actually have accidents at work. And if you look at people like the construction industry, they're particularly careful things, even things like breath testing and drug testing. My friends run big companies and they're drug testing people at the start. So you're exactly right. We have to do a combination of things, whether it's safe workplace, prevention, giving employers, penalties if they be naughty and don't provide that work safe environment.
Phil.
Yes, Gay, that's an appalling example that you've given of the favours of the system, and we really must do a lot better and improve the legislation to enable that to happen. Businesses should certainly be penalised for their failures, and in cases, extreme cases, the Greens are certainly supportive of industrial manslaughter provisions. And we really have to get serious about safety in the workplace. There has been a shift away from having the primary responsibility for occupational health and safety resting with the employer, a shift towards making that the responsibility of the individual workers, where in many cases they haven't got access to the means and the funds or the control of the organisation, the business, to implement the changes that are necessary. There are some processes, but they need to be improved. Trade unions have had a lot of their power to enforce non-compliance removed, and the rights of entry of unions into the workplace have been severely restricted, as have their investigation and inspection powers. So these are changes that have been introduced by Conservative governments and need to be reversed in the opinion of the Greens. The workers' compensation system should provide a quick, easy and effective and legally binding mechanism. And to do that, we need to have the work cover much better resourced. They need to have more inspectors and stronger powers to prosecute, and to ensure that the industrial relations system works really quickly. So I sympathise with that example, and it's just one of many that shows that a lot of work needs to be done to improve the workers' compensation system.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay. Go.
Yeah, I've got another quick, just a rebuttal with James. Just a quick comment with the work health safety laws. That was actually instigated by the then Julia Gillard as the Industrial Relations Minister in 2008, I was actually part of the COAG discussion group for the work health safety laws. So that was a Labor incentive for work health safety laws when they came through. So.
But I'm talking about New South Wales Labor's position. I understand that there was some...
But it was pushed through. I could sit here all day talking about it. I've been on a lot of committees for it. Anyhow, the question I just want to bring up is about journey claims. Since the change with people cannot be compensated for to and from work unless it's a direct work-related incident, how is government going to cost now CTP green slips? My CTP green slip has gone up 22%. And when I spoke to a couple of underwriters, including Marsh advised that CTP green slips have now increased as a result of an increase of people claiming to and from work-related sort of accidents that are now back on the CTP green slip default instead of being a workers' compensation claim. So how are you going to keep your constituents happy that now their CTP green slips are going to increase as a result of journey claims cost is now going on to that?
Okay. Jeff.
Excellent, thank you. Thank you again, Gay. Very interesting CTP green slips and the cost of those, because that's one of the things that everyone gets reminded when they go up significantly every year. And that's one of the things our government tried to address in putting through legislation about CTP green slips and reducing the premiums by about 30%. And we looked at things like no-fault basis. So if it's a small claim, rather than go through years of litigation where both sides spend hundreds of thousands of dollars, we just pay out the money because the lawyers were making the money. So just pay out. Unfortunately, that legislation went to the upper house, which we don't have control, and the New South Wales Labor is actually the ones that blocked that and didn't vote for it, so we didn't get any reform in CTP green slips to actually come through. So we're still going back to and looking at the review and saying, how can we lower those green slips? Because $600, $700 or $500 for a green slip is a lot of money. You and I pay the same, I'm sure. But without support of reform, it will continue along. And I should stress that it was Labor in the upper house, in the New South Wales Parliament, that wouldn't allow us to put that CTP. So every time you pay your green slip, you can be assured that it's New South Wales Labor that actually continued on those aspects.
Okay. Phil.
Yes, the Greens have been very critical of any retrograde steps in the workers' compensation area, Gay. And we were strongly opposed to the John Della Bosco workers' compensation, occupational health and safety attacks under the Carr government, as we were strongly opposed to the 2012 Barry O'Farrell Coalition state government attacks on the system, which were retrograde. And the union movement joined with the Greens and I believe Labor too in opposing those, certainly the O'Farrell tax they opposed at that time. The issue you talk about particularly on the green slips, you're absolutely right. Obviously the shifting of the journey claims into the public arena, if you like, has resulted in increases in insurance charges and costs because of that. The Greens' position on this is that journey claims should be returned into the workers' compensation system, where it was for decades. I'm not sure how many decades that might have been, but it was for a long time, and that would avoid the problem you're referring to, and would simplify the process. The premiums too, even the government's own accountants, actuaries have advised that the scheme originally was not in chronic situation and was on track to return to surplus without the savage amendments pushed through in 2012. So I think there are other ways of looking at this when you consider the complexities involved in the system and look at the issues that James raised in respect of those.
Can I say something about those CTPs?
James, and then we can come to you. Okay, James.
Apologies, I didn't realise I hadn't finished before what you were saying. I didn't mean to interrupt. Well, the solution to the journey claim, the abolition of journey claims, putting more pressure on CTP green slips, is to reinstate journey claims, and that's New South Wales Labor's policy. So I believe that's the case. But I'll just say the reason that we didn't support the changes is that they, again, reduced payments to those people who had been in motor vehicle accidents. And, you know, that's something that we didn't support in terms of the government's legislation there. But certainly I agree that when you legislate and you remove an entitlement, it often has an impact somewhere else, and that's what's happened here. So I believe that we should reinstate journey claims.
Okay, thank you very much.
I actually don't mind the CTP green slips being added onto our insurance, because we might have a better deal with the insurance company for the cars, for anything involving cars, than with workers' comp. Now, sir, tell me, I didn't get to that, tell me, all these fabulous laws that we brought out in 2012, who stays on top of the employers that these rules are followed? Because these rules were not followed in my case. I'm the first, I think, and the perfect example of every law that Barry O'Farrell brought out, and it was broken by the company and the solicitors. And I'm sorry if I get emotional, but I do suffer from depression since 2008, because I was a very, very strong person in the community. I worked for 19 years. And today I'm worth nothing, absolutely nothing. I have to go to the government for my medicals. I have to go to government for operations, and it shouldn't be. The company paid my medical, and if somebody made sure in the Liberal government that these laws were followed, maybe 99% of us injured workers wouldn't be in the predicament that we're in today. I have been coming to the Injured Workers Support Network for years, and the little that I know I learned here from you people. And I'm mind-boggled as today why I should pay solicitors $52,000 for them doing bugger all, for taking my claim to the thing, even though I was over 30% whole person impaired. So who makes these people follow the laws that Barry O'Farrell brought in? Who makes them? They dismiss me from my job.
All right, so I think it's Phil now.
Well, work cover has got responsibility, but there have been, I understand, significant job cuts in that area. There should actually be an increase in the numbers of work cover inspectors, and increase in the funding and resources for that organisation to do the proper policing that workers deserve.
Okay.
And also the rights of unions, as I've mentioned, need to be improved, so that they can get reports directly from the workplace of unsafe circumstances that haven't been addressed, so that they can put pressure on the employer to do the right thing. It's really difficult if an individual has to do that, and that's where the unions play a really important role to ensure that, that those safe work practices are implemented. So that's, I think, part of it, but we do need legislative changes too to empower work cover and the industrialisation system to take action.
1 minute.
I know as a Teachers Federation, or teacher and the unions with the Teachers Federation, we've had enormous difficulties trying to pursue cases, particularly of psychological injury due to work overload and so on, that the employer has failed to address, and in fact increases the pressure in that situation. And when claims are made, they almost invariably refuse to accept them and pursue them through the courts, and that causes enormous further psychological injury to people who are already damaged. So I can only sympathise and indicate that the Greens are all for improving all those things I've just spoken about.
Thank you. James.
Look, I largely agree with what Phil has said. I think the important point in terms of work cover, whose duty it is to oversee these laws, is that they have been restructured in a way to take away from their enforcement role. So the complete focus has been education. As I said, education, of course we want education, but that's been the complete focus in terms of work cover. And yes, the there has been a reduction in the ability of unions and work cover to be able to prosecute. And it wasn't like prosecutions were happening all the time, but they happened when they needed to happen, and that's been reduced. And yes, it's true that Labor in Canberra supported some of these changes, but at a state level, New South Wales Labor opposed those changes. There were good elements to changes that the Rudd and Gillard government pushed, but clearly reducing the ability to prosecute wasn't one of them. So that's been our position throughout there. There was one other point. I just want to make the point as well. It's not the case that these changes have meant less money for lawyers and that's gone into the pockets of workers. That's not what's happened here. Payments have been reduced to the overwhelming number of workers. It's only a very small fraction of workers who have the over 20% whole of body injury to be deemed as total incapacity.
Thank you, James. Jeff.
Thank you. And Cheryl, I don't think you need to apologise. I think, your case from 2008 and 2009, I mean, obviously it's just gone pear-shaped and wrong. And can I just make a few observations? And I don't know your case, and I apologise.
I've been fighting all the time. I've been that one, yeah.
And it's interesting that it was 2008, 2009, which is why this just symptomatic of a dysfunctional workers' comp system that didn't work, and that it's combative style in terms of lawyers fighting other lawyers and trying to get your money, and what a waste of time and effort, and it puts you through so much emotional stress, and the system shouldn't do that. That's just wrong. I agree with you, it's wrong. Can I make the other comment, which is controversial? We talked about it briefly before, in terms of journey to work and journey to home that was excluded from that policy. I actually agree with the principle that if an employer is responsible, an employer cannot be held responsible for how an employee gets to work and from behind. So why should they be financially responsible? Which is a critical, and we'll all disagree with that. But this sort of stuff should be beyond politics. This should be about you and about sorting out your claim. And it's about, work cover does, unfortunately, James, it does have the enforcement power. It does enforce those things. But the other mechanism, and we'll talk later, is, and I've talked to the Minister about that, but I'm more than happy, we have local MPs, that if all the systems fail, there's a lot of people as the MP that come and see me. And then I make those representations to the Minister. Because I think that's an important way also that they can review that file. Maybe they can't do anything, I can't promise on things, but at least we can fight for you and represent you. And I think that's one of the key things that we can actually do for you in terms of, and yes, work cover does have it, and like James said, it doesn't.
Please wrap up.
But again, 2008, 2009 claims is just exemplary of a failure in the system to act for people like you.
Can I just say something before the Minister?
Hold on.
The journey claim is being paid for, but the back and the shoulders claim in 2009 is not being paid for. So
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions?
It's the end of justice.
I'm very new to all this. I put a claim in last year, psychological injury that was caused, and I was wronged by the employer. But today, I still do not know what workers' comp actually is and will do for me. I'm now having to battle with getting reports from my psychiatrist and clinical psychologist, because the money that was awarded in the funding was nowhere near enough for them to actually even do a proper report. And now I'm having to jump up and down and maybe make agreements with people to pay the extra monies, and I still have no idea, and I'm just totally lost. And the other thing is, what is workers' compensation? Because after 17 years in this one employer, making my way up the ladder, I've been crushed and now destroyed. And then I don't know where I'm going to end up. So you talk about the 13 weeks, and then after that you have to be totally impaired and quadriplegic. Well, stuff that, like my life has been destroyed, and I don't know what that represents. So for me, the whole system's flawed, and we need to look at it again. It's just
Okay. James.
Well, it's a broad question, but I suppose workers' compensation, as I said earlier, should be about supporting workers who have been injured, often through no fault of their own, injured doing their work. And yes, for me, that does include travelling to work and going home from work. And ultimately workers' compensation was always a no-fault scheme. You don't have to prove negligence, and so there's no reason why it shouldn't include going to work or coming home from work. But I agree with you, the system is insufficient. I suppose that's been my argument, and we need to look at. I'm not against looking at changes which may assist cases being settled more quickly and resolved more quickly. Absolutely, we should look at that.
Well, I'm
I'm
not
not
going to wait
convinced.
10 years.
I'm not convinced though,
Wait
and your story,
7
you sort
years.
of,
It
your
scares
story
me.
seems to
It
confirm
scares
me.
me.
I'm not convinced that is what's happened
1 minute.
really at all. So that's part of, I think, needs to be the solution, absolutely, but it needs to be something that gives people proper financial support.
Jeff?
Thank you. Sorry, I didn't catch your name.
Kevin.
Kevin. Kevin, I mean, the difficulty is, I think, with those psychological injuries and things, you get an expert saying this and an expert saying that. They're really hard. It's like soft tissue injury. What is right and what is wrong? I mean, you can't do an X-ray of someone's head and then find out those psychological. So, on your personal matter, it is very hard for me to say without knowing those personal circumstances about you and about what happens. But, on the broader question, what is workers' comp? For me, it's an independent fund that's funded by all the employees at a percentage of people's wages. And then that money, if someone gets hurt or injured at work and needs rehabilitation and or a payout, is distributed back to those injured workers. So all the employers pay it on a percentage of their wages, depending upon the industry. For instance, mine was about 11%. When I was a landscaper, paid into a fund. If someone gets injured, the employer is penalised if they have injuries based upon
1 minute.
their predicted amount, so that they do, as we talked to Gay before, is if you have bad experience and a bad experience factor, it can actually lead to higher premiums, which is a disincentive. But can I say overall, and I can't speak about your case, and I'm happy again to chat to Cheryl, is that the results from the incentives for people to get back into the workforce have resulted in New South Wales from being the lowest return, one of the lowest return to work for injuries to one of the highest, if not the highest, at something like 70% within those 13 weeks. Obviously, individual cases vary, and it's impossible for me to definitively say X.
Okay, thank you. It's 12 o'clock now. I promised that we'd get this done within an hour, so we might wrap it up there. Sorry?
I haven't had a turn yet.
Oh, I apologise. Thank you very much,
Sorry.
Phil. I thought that would happen once in this, but please
Yes.
take the two.
Kevin, I can sympathise with your situation. It's a very difficult issue, psychological injury. You can call it nervous, in many cases, nervous breakdown is a term also used, rather than euphemism. I personally know people in the Teachers Federation of Teachers who've collapsed due to psychological injury and just couldn't go on, couldn't think straight, couldn't do their work. They just hit a brick wall. And it's very serious, but in this case, the department supported by the government was refusing claims, and there are all sorts of excuses. And as I said, they're almost always challenged, we find in the Department of Education, such injuries. Because they are difficult to prove, but they're real and must be addressed. And one of the essential parts about this, it needs to be addressed quickly, because the system itself places an enormous psychological burden on the individuals that choose to claim or to fight for just compensation. So rehabilitation is really important in this, and there should be an absolute obligation on the employer in such cases to find suitable duties to ease the person back into the workplace and to build their confidence and to respect the fact that psychological injury is a real and serious problem, just like as physical injuries are, and that must be addressed, and the employer must take a major responsibility for this.
Thank you, and I do apologise that I got mixed up.
That's right.
Rowan still loves you, Phil.
So one more question before we go. Why didn't they just leave the workers' compensation laws the way they were before? We were much better off then than we are now. Under the 2012 laws, we were much better off. I got all the things of the last thing. Like I said, I'm with the workers' compensation for years, the injured worker support. And I've had to, through their help, have to fight the many changes for the CEOs, but why didn't they, what made them go and delve into the workers' compensation laws? Why couldn't they sort out like other laws? that affect us most? Why do they go into the workers' compensation laws and change them? I'm interested to know,
Okay.
especially as a worker, you know.
All right. So I think Jeff, you're first
Yep.
up on this one.
Yep, I'll say Cheryl, and clearly you've had the worst experience, and I think, you know, Cheryl, it's you or Kevin or Gay, you've each had claims that are very difficult. Like you've had claims from 2009 not satisfied, your claim 2008 not sorted out. You've had your husband had
Just one thing. Mine was a physical. My husband's was physical. It was black and white, broken vertebrae, and it was denied.
and that was in 2006.
Yeah, like,
So
I
this
just
is
fell
long
off a
before-
ladder on the job, carrying a person
I mean,
on
it
the
sounds
shoulder.
like black and white to me as well. But
But-
can I say the system didn't work for the employers, it didn't work for people like you, the employees. It was unsustainable, it was whether it was in $2.4 billion or $4 billion deficit. Yes, in 10 or 15 years it would have returned back in surplus, but I think that both the unions and the government agree that the system should be a self-sustaining system and that we couldn't continue along that path. So we adopted the Victorian model. Early results suggest, as I keep saying,
1 minute.
the serious injured get more money and bigger payouts, and those that have less injuries are actually returning to the fastest. So it's all about the rehab of those, and Phil's exactly right. We should encourage the rehab, and there are laws about the employers responsible for encouraging and putting programs in place, workplace programs, to encourage people to actually return to work. We need to do that, and we need to make sure that we've gone from last place, I think we're last, to just about number one, or number one place into return to work. And I think for people's well-being, for their personal and emotional and family well-being, it's important to try and get people, if they're able, back into the workforce as soon as they can, whether it's on limited duties, on a return to work program, on a rehab program, and that's where we part of the solution
Please
to these
wrap up.
answers.
Okay. Phil.
Yes, I essentially agree with what you're saying, that earlier versions of industrial relations laws in respect to workers' compensation had many provisions which were better than what we have now. That's quite clear. There's clear evidence about that. On the other side, though, there were some good ideas and approaches in some of the legislation. I think introducing the concept of risk assessment was really strong, and education of workers. There were some beneficial ideas of workplace committees, and the ability for workers to access release from their duties in some cases, although that's extremely hard to achieve in many cases. So I suppose you've got to look at the overall situation. But the driving force behind all these changes is cost cutting, frankly. And a major problem with the analyses that I've seen is that the economists don't allow for the savings, the benefits in the equation, the externalities that may not be directly a benefit to the employer in question, who is concerned about paying for safety measures or whatever, but there are benefits to the whole system to keep a worker fit and healthy and gainfully employed, even if the is to move to another job and to live a fulfilling life. If the worker doesn't have to claim those compensation claims, there's major benefits to society, not only to the injured worker but to the family and our whole community. And those externalities of savings is something that our current economic approach does not properly address. It only looks at the immediate costs in the system rather than costs that might be outside the immediacy of the current accident.
James.
Well, look, essentially I agree with what you're saying. I think that the 2012 laws were a backward step for workers. I think we do need to, since 1987, there has been a focus on other suitable duties, on trying to get people back to work. And of course, overwhelmingly injured workers, they want to get back to work. They want to go and work and contribute to society. They're more frustrated than anybody else about their situation. But understand that sometimes they just can't. Or that, you know, that maybe there's an ability, they've had a capacity assessment to say they can do task XYZ, but task XYZ is not available for them, or at least not at that time. And so that's why we need to be compassionate in our approach. We need to support people who are injured. yes, work on getting them back to work. Of course, that's the case. But
1 minute.
let's not leave them out in a situation without compensation or without fair compensation, when often they can't work. They've often got families, mortgages, all sorts of responsibilities, car payments, etc. We have to support them, and I believe these changes don't do that, and we need to go back and have sensible, compassionate workers' compensation legislation.
Thank you.